So hello, my friends. This is coming to you on the 24th, 2024. And the date is important because something like a week from today, Donald Trump and Joe Rogan are going to have a conversation and an interview Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan's podcast. And it's important in terms that most people don't even begin to understand. This is not an attempt late in the campaign to gather up as many of Joe Rogan's 17 million followers and try to convince them that they ought to vote for Donald Trump, although, of course, it is that. It is far, far more significant than that. And let me explain that to you, because guys like me have for decades now, like really decades, 3 decades at least, been talking about this major kind of transition that was inbound, coming certainly. I read all the books and had all these friends, the fourth turning, and all of these big indications, Alvin Toffler, and any number of big picture, big brain people who were looking at the trends, and that you could see it was all coming together down here at some date certain. And I was very much involved in that and building, writing little books and reports that were being used at very high levels in the government as with these kind of big pictures about what was coming. And as a matter of fact, that solidified my kind of career and my track because I could see for the first time, starting back in the 80s, that there was this convergence coming and that it was unprecedented in terms of its kind of magnitude and significance, and that it became the central kind of animating idea about what I've done ever since. And this is so it was a big deal, and I've said a number of times that it's kind of slightly surreal to have talked about these kinds of things in this particular transition or the big shift, and then suddenly be in the middle of it and watching it all happen, and it's almost like shifting gears because things don't. Well, not only are you're going faster because you're shifting up gear, I guess, and but it is also then it brings you into a whole different kind of set of organizing ideas that are related to this very dynamic situation that just didn't exist before. And we've all talked about that before, and how that things are irrational and they're not predictable, and and it's chaotic, and all of those things for which we have no analog and we have no experience. And so it's interesting just at face value in terms of watching the end of one era and the beginning of another one, the end of one paradigm, one framework for making sense out of things, and the emergence of a new one, the implosion of the old kind of world and all of the institutions and the structures, and just kind of collapsing under their own weight because they're unsustainable in really kind of fundamental terms, and making way for the emergence of a whole new world. It's a set of dynamics and a process that we just well, essentially no one in recorded history, as we understand it, has ever gone through anything like this before. And so we just all of our systems and all of our institutions and everything is built around the assumption of kind of incremental change. It might be kind of faster than usual, but nevertheless, it's kind of incremental, and it's an extrapolation, if you will, of the past. Maybe the slope of the curve is going higher and it's faster and faster, but the assumption of all of the systems, all the institutions, the very metabolism, the structure that defines the metabolism and how they work and their ability to be agile and decisive and all of that kind of stuff is all a mismatch with the environment and the situation that we live in now, that we're living in now. And so that in and of itself generates a great deal of novelty, if you will. Uh, there are things that are happening that we've just never seen before, and it stretches our ability to kind of make sense out of it, to come figure out what we need to do next or how you respond to the things. I mean, for instance, uh, we are all dependent upon intermediaries to communicate to us what supposedly is happening anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in the country, anywhere else in town. All we can see is what you can see in front of you. And so the only thing you know about anything other than what's in front of you is all determined by and communicated by some intermediary. It's a media, that's the function of the media, is to play this intermediary role. Well, the media is captured, and it's a subject we can talk about some other time, but there is no objectivity in it at all. And so the sole kind of function that is supposed to communicate and give us a sense of how this larger environment works that we live in is 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 uh, uh, corrupted. It is failed at this very structural and fundamental kind of way, and so the ability to make sense out of this and where it's going and everything is of driving us all into a new space about how we make sense, how we understand, and how we make decisions. And it's not the historical and usual way in which we kind of linearly from deterministically kind of stack up pros and cons and other such things, and are limited only by what we've experienced and what we've seen. I mean, it's driving us into a whole different space to where you can access information from your intuition and from places that we really don't understand and don't know, but it still is an effective way in which you can kind of navigate this amazing kind of volatility and uncertainty in the time that we're going. And so that's it's that alone is enough to kind of get your attention and consume, yeah, all your day, and generate great uncertainty in your mind and any number of other kind of things as we go forward into this space, and it accelerates. But it's more than that. It's significantly more than that, apparently. And let me explain this to you. in my business of trying to think about the future, and particularly in these times of essentially exponential change, what one has to do is reach outside of the conventional sources, the historical kind of sources that are derived from the principles, the scientific kind of principles that shape the whole way in which the modern world works. Uh, it's the whole system is built upon these presumptions of uh, that come out of science and mathematics, essentially, that supposedly describe how things work, and therefore that's why you get driven into this kind of a ex this this situation to where you just look at things as a variation of what it's been in the past. It's driving us into these extraordinary kind of unusual kind of space. And uh, if you're not going to get consumed by and circumscribed by the old kind of way and approach to making decisions like this, then what you have to do necessarily is you have to get outside of the box. And those of you who have followed some of what we talk about in the past know very well that uh, I decided a long time ago that the world was a whole lot bigger than what the science has described and physics has described, and that it is other dimensional at least, and then based upon probably a new framework of physics that we don't fully yet understand, and certainly much bigger than just what's happening on this planet and the local area where we can see. And so you've got to get outside of the box, and you've got to kind of look for sources that allow you to see things and make sense out of things that historical and traditional kind of approaches mask. And so I decided a long time ago that I needed to be able to find and identify what these other mechanisms were that could help from their own kind of point of view to help make sense out of this. Those of you, again, who follow me know that I'm a fan of Martin Armstrong because he's got this computer program that has never been wrong and is built upon some very novel ideas about the kind of cyclical nature of how reality works, and has been very accurate in predicting things. And so that is very interesting and helpful is providing an outside of the box perspective, right, into a space where nobody's ever been before, and that is increasingly kind of irrational, if not invisible, or uh, and so that's one approach. Another one is Clif High. Clif High from a website called halfpasshuman.com is a very bright, uh, kind of a polymath kind of guy who uh, is knowledgeable about many, many different aspects of life. And particularly a lot of history and mathematics and computer programming, and certainly things about biochemistry and yeah, just a whole lot of stuff. And he has a program called the WebBot system that is based upon the assumption that all human beings are naturally psychic. And although they may not realize it, and most don't, and that essentially we receive these psychic messages and we integrate them into our lives in rather subtle ways that we don't that we don't understand at all, or we don't know what we're doing. But if you have an idea about how that works, then you can extract that information, and the way it works and how it manifests itself is in our language. And that our language kind of changes, and it changes in ways that we're not conscious of, but it changes because some big event is on the horizon, and there's a bow wave essentially that is precedes it and washes its way through where we are in temporal time and space. We start using words and phrases in a different way. Um, Cliff has refined this thing very much, and has done that uh, really quite significantly over the years, such that he now has billions of spiders that run around the web on a kind of a regular basis, analyzing how the language is changing and how people are using it in 6 different languages, as a matter of fact, and he has identified the kind of the underlying structure of how the languages of what the languages communicate. That is to say that when you choose a word, you choose that word in part because of the kind of energy underneath it, and you if and that you can be extracted, and the type of words and what the words are can be analyzed, and in that process it can be very predictive. He's got maybe a 65-70% accuracy in being able to predict things in the future. He's got quite a success record of major things, and they are, and that's novel. That's unique. There is just nobody else that generates the granularity and the detail that Cliff does, and it's all based upon an interpretation of this language and the new phrases that come up, and where in the larger kind of system that we live in, whether it's the mainline media or the governments or whatever it turns out to be, whatever category in the large cosmology that he's got put together, um, that wherever it shows up, he can track it on a longitudinal way, and be able to see where the new ideas are showing up and how they are migrating through the whole system. And that then is predictive. Um, Words and phrases have this energetic kind of signature to them, and that allows you to kind of figure out how close an event is, and so on. It's quite complex, but very interesting, innovative, and accurate, and so it's worth listening to. And I want to tell you a story about kind of Clif High and what has happened here, and why the interview with Joe Rogan and Donald Trump is so critical and central. Back in 2009, Clif High was looking at the data sets that he was generating by all of these robots that were running around the the world in the virtual space. And what he noticed was a very large kind of spike of energy that he calls a temporal marker. Now, a temporal marker is a kind of a novel. It doesn't they don't happen very often, but it is a marker in time. It's a temporal marker, and that it is important because it telegraphs that something is happening or gonna happen or has already happened. There's something, it's a marker in time that is significant because of kind of the adjacencies, the things that are before and after it. That if you kind of expand time-wise the information that you have, and you've got a temporal marker that shows up, then you know that it is related to a subsequent event that's going to happen. And if you've analyzed the information correctly, you've got a sense of how long the time is before the next thing is going to happen. I mean, that's the significance of the marker. The marker relates to another event that happens. And sometimes it is at the kind of the end of a series of things. Sometimes it precedes the information that comes downstream. And so the major successes that Clif High has had in being able to predict futures have been related largely to temporal markers that, for instance, many years before COVID, he got information about, and this all is derived from changes in people's language. He got information that said that people would be running around and wearing strange things on their face and on their heads, and that um, his interpretation was that it was a sun disease, and the reason why it was a disease or some kind of effect or byproduct of the sun was because the words that were coming up were corona. And the only thing that he could make sense out of was corona was from the sun, and since they were covering their heads, he presumed and predicted that it had something to do with the sun. Uh, I had friends of mine who dream about the future, and they too saw Corona and thought it was a beer bottle, and it was something about, Corona beer. And so you have these interpretive kind of issues that are related to the techniques that underpin or the basis for this kind of interpretation. Uh, but in any case, he saw that, what, 2 years or at least beforehand. And as it evolved, it became clear that it was the coronavirus, not the corona from the sun. And yet all of these things about people running around with things on their face and on their heads and so on were quite accurate. He found similar kind of things. It's with anticipating that Donald Trump would be getting elected 6 months beforehand. The major financial disruption of the 2008, he had like 2 years beforehand, and the on and on. So there's a lot of kind of successes. The recent first assassination attempt for Donald Trump up here in Pennsylvania. He had anticipated that a couple of weeks earlier, and he only missed it by about 3 hours in terms of the literal time when it happened. And so the system that he uses is compared to, looking into a black box that gives you no other indications about what might happen, no substantial ways. It is really quite interesting and useful. So in 2009, he gets this temporal marker, this big spike in the data that says that there's something really significant going to happen. And the temporal marker is that two important people are going to have a conversation that will be very large and very influential, planetary wide almost. And that what that will do will be the marker before a set of events that describe and define the beginning of the next big era in time, which he calls the Sci-Fi World. Sci-Fi World, where things are like science fiction in terms of what's happening and how it's happening and the logic and so on. It drives you into a whole different kind of space that was like fiction beforehand. And so that's in 2009. He has no idea who the people are. And they're just important folks, and they're having a conversation. And then in 2012, he sees or he revisits this. He had forgotten about it and gotten involved in a bunch of other things, and he revisited it. He said it's really there, and it's really big, and it's really significant, and something is really going to happen. And it's then that he decides that he is going to reach outside of his kind of framework, and he was going to get some outside help to take a look at this and make sense out of it. And so he went to the remote viewers, to the best ones in the world, out in the open space at least, and he tasked them, paid the money, I'm sure, and it's all an anonymous kind of process. They have no idea what this target is or who has given them the target. And what they came back with, and the leader of this group is a guy named Dick Algier, who lives in Hawaii. And when they came back, what Algier drew a picture of and hit it straight on, and he said, here's a conversation with these two people, and one of them is Joe Rogan, and the other one is Donald Trump. It was in 2012, right? And so this kind of confirms in rather significant ways to Clif High that this is real, and that there is something here that he had no idea who the people were or the principles were in this conversation beforehand. But now he's got a fix on who they're likely to be. And so then you move to about 2015, and you're getting yourself into the election, and Trump shows up, and that really confirms that Trump is likely to be a player here. So then it goes to 2020, and at some point in this period, one of Clif's helpers, who had worked on all of his data for about 10 years, reminds him of the fact that there is this temporal marker that's related to Joe Rogan and Donald Trump, and that they're talking about Joe Rogan moderating one of the debates, the campaign debates, the presidential campaign debates in 2020. And so they raised this whole thing again, the possibility and what the significance might be. And they talk about it at the time, but Clif says, no, it's not a debate. It's two guys. It's just the two of them talking to each other. And so the thing kind of goes away. But as it moves further in time, it starts to generate more granularity, more specificity about what a subsequent kind of event is likely to be after this temporal marker of this debate, this discussion, this interview between Joe Rogan and Donald Trump. And what it turns out to be is that it starts to generate all kinds of imagery about what's in the sky, and activities going on, dramatic activities in the sky with UFO kind of craft, and in some cases jets, and they're all flying around, and maybe it's conflict is what it is, or some other kind of thing. But this is a really, really big deal, and it is so big a deal that it essentially, as he says, forever, people will look back and say that is the beginning of Sci-Fi World. That's when that broke open all the gates and the doors, and people realized that this place doesn't work the way it always has. We've always thought it had, and so it turns into a whole new kind of experience and living and presumptions about everything. The importance of this is quantitatively determined. That is to say that Clif can look at this different events, and he can figure out that they vary somewhere between about 2.5 and 5.5 in the metrics that he uses. And so a really big one like 9/11 or something like that would be about a 5.5. A lesser one would be like 2.5 or something like that. And so they vary in there, and you can interpret the significance of this upcoming event by the energetic, and essentially this is looking at kind of the energetic content of the words and what they suggest. The problem with that is that this new event that is tied to the Rogan and the Trump interaction is 81 times bigger than the size of 9/11. This is huge in terms of its implications and its size and its impact. And like he said, is it's based upon all of these things in the sky and alien life and the clear sense that this all exists and that we're living in a new space. And the further analysis of the process says that it will happen about 39 days after the Rogan interview with Donald Trump. Well, wow. So now you sit around and you say to yourself, man alive, that, and you're sitting here in the middle of this, right? I told you, I've been giving speeches about this for decades, and then suddenly you're there and you're just sitting here looking at this whole thing. If he's right, and what he says is, I don't know for sure what would happen, and it may not happen exactly the way we thought, but something really big is generating all of this energy. Something happens. And so now contextualize it, right? So now how far we're a month out, we're less than a month from the election. Well, in the presidential election in the United States. And the election is on the 5th, right? And so of November, 24th of October to the 5th of November. So, I mean, you've got a week and 2 weeks or something like that. You're getting there in a hurry, and you're going to do the Rogan interview a week before the election. And then the big event happens, a month and a week more or less after the election. So now, wow, now you've set up all kinds of interesting kind of variables in the middle of this thing, because the big issue, or of course, that consumes all of us here in the United States, is who's going to win the election. And in a sense, that is diversionary relative to this bigger, much, much bigger issue and problem, and any of a number of other ones, by the way. But in any case, it uh, consumes all of the bandwidth on the media and everything else right now. But what's really interesting and what's historic in terms of where we're living and what the implications of all this might be is that if he's at all right, now he's also, by the way, then gone back to the remote viewers and said, "What do you think?" And they're coming up with the same kinds of stuff that they did before. There is an extraordinary interview, or it's really a conversation between Dick Algeier and Clif High that just came out about a week ago that describes all this story that I've told you, but with a lot more detail and content that uh, is very, very compelling and profound in terms of what its implications are. And so regardless, and so you've got two pretty solid, I mean, relatively speaking, very solid kind of sources, unconventional to be sure, but sources that are both saying, here comes something. Now, the last time I talked kind of in these terms, it was when Clif High was saying that on a Monday in July, was it, that some big event was going to happen. And there were a bunch of other people who were all saying the same thing. And it didn't happen on Monday. It happened on Saturday. And that was the assassination attempt on Trump. And so now you've got this new thing coming downstream that is so much larger than anything else and could literally just kick open the brand new era in terms of human life on this planet. And we're here. And it is now. And it's right in our face. Now, I don't want to drag this out a whole lot, but there are any of a number of responses out of the back end of this thing that could, all of which are the major ones that people are kind of talking about, all of which could be very disruptive. Disruptive of the electrical system or the internet, or who knows. There's a lot of people saying that for what it's worth, that Donald Trump wins the election and Kamala Harris becomes the president. What does that mean? Well, it could mean that there's an assassination. It could mean any number of other kind of stuff. But that's what you're into. You're into this period going at least into January or February or something that is really, really disruptive. And it may be like the assassination of the Archduke or something in Austria, whatever, that started World War I, right? So it could be this kind of critical catalytic event that then opens up and kicks off all other kinds of things. Martin Armstrong says that next year starts a global civil war that lasts for a couple of years. Well, maybe this would be the kind of event that would do that. So it's a very interesting times that we live in, and it guarantees that when we come back and talk to you again the next time, we'll have more fascinating and interesting things to talk about. So thank you.